I now want to make a few references to Peter Harrison of Palmerston North, who was one of the most wonderful men I've ever met. He reminded me very much of his father-in-law, Brian Deck of Motueka. In fact, I visited Ashton Wood at Motueka. His wife stayed there. Lovely time, beautiful house, looking down over Motueka. Beautiful vista. And it just came into my heart to ring my old friend Lincoln and Val McGaveston. So I rang the home number, got Val, and she was very frosty. And I just asked questions. She said, "Oh, Bruce Hales is the Paul of our day." Very, very definite. So that's an aside. But I got hold of the meetings, the fellowship meeting at London, April the 24th, 2022. My father's birthday, my dear father, who came into fellowship age 17 and was chucked out. He was just 40, I think, 40 when he was chucked out. Bright, he came bright, when it was a good religion, broadly speaking. But then Aberdeen, everything went crazy. And then we had Symington to stay, and JT3 took one of the first 3-day meetings in the UK. Leeds stayed with us. And anyway, this is some 89, my father would have been 89, I think, or thereabouts, on the 24th of April 2022. And knowing that Mr. Hales was in the country, I alerted my brother Garth, but I'd written to Bruce Hales, as had Peter Harrison, earlier in March or April, earlier in April, I think. Yes, it was in April, that very same month. So, yeah, Bruce Hales says, well on in the reading, we don't worry about resistance. That's one of the reasons why I came across here unannounced, because I get some pretty awful letters. They don't worry me. I do read them because I like to know what people are saying or thinking, even if they're deranged. Thank you. People attacking me that I've never even met. Well, I think that he's met me many times, so that must be Peter Harrison, I think. I feel sorry for them. Well, it's nice to know that Mr. Hales feels sorry for us. As if they're going to alter the course of the recovery by some few, excuse me, saying this, weak strokes of a pen. They're probably thinking of that saying that said, the pen is mightier than the sword, or something. Well, I'd rather them come across and have a sword fight, as long as I had about a month's practice. Well, whenever I've been to his house, he won't see me. I wasn't taking the sword, although he seemed to think I had a shotgun or something. I was going to put a bullet or cap through his brain. I certainly didn't. I'm not a violent person. That's what you need if you're going to have a bout. You need a bit of practice. I learnt that from my school days. If there was going to be a fight on, just ask for time. You make up an excuse. Just say, I need time. I'll meet you in a month. By that time, you were ready for it. So he goes on into violent stuff and boxing, wrestling, and the need to stand your ground and all that sort of stuff. So when Peter got hold of this, and the Lord took him not too long after this, he said, well, I decided to read this ministry without prejudice, as though it was not Bruce Hales, but some other unknown minister. But it sounded pretty EB-ish, but generally acceptable. And he said that the everyday experience of the brethren is that any personal conscientious promptings from Christ are trumped by Bruce Hales, which has the practical result that members look to Bruce for safe expressions of Christ. Any other promptings are rival. So they looked to Christ. They looked through Bruce to Christ. Bruce is their representative, the Lord's representative. So any of us that have a different thought to Bruce are rival or opposers. Consequently, references to Christ would actually be transferred to what is seen through great men, including himself, the great men of the recovery, the leaders. And then he refers to the letters. Bruce Hales' references to the letters is pure propaganda, which he gets away with because the facts are screened from members. He's not saying they're from Peter Harrison and Lance Christie, so they could be from anyone. But intelligent ones guess. They put two and two together and make four. So although he appears to be speaking in riddles at times, if you know what's going on and you're insightful, you can sometimes work it out. And Peter says, perhaps he's referring to my letters. Why is he so paranoid? Paranoia is not a Christ-like feature. Jesus felt sorry for his opposers, but I don't think he was spooked by them in the way that Bruce Hales appears to be. And he just makes reference to the believing believers, which is a disturbing hint that not all believers are to Bruce Hales' approval. Probably most believers. So, yeah. And then in the reading, he refers to the Lord being in the presence of the intensity of the greatest opposition. But the Lord didn't move away on that account. They took up stones to cast them at him. Well, of course, you know, if he thinks I've been wanting to fire a bullet, you could link that with the stones thrown at the Lord. They didn't actually. I didn't actually shoot him. I didn't even think of shooting him. I'm thinking of my appeal was purely divine grace and wanting repentance. If he's hurting people and breaking up families, he needs to change simply. And the Lord is in the presence of the intensest, greatest opposition. That's another thing. Bruce Hales apparently says, I am the greatest, the worst opposer in the history of the recovery. So the hints are there. And who can say whether he's referring to me or not? But it seems very likely. And I feel quite restful about it because it's actually he that's overreacting. But I'm just saying, occasionally I get some ministry that comes and I'm just trying to work it out. And then he speaks about appearings. What appearings we've had, beloved. And what a difference they've made is the challenge. And he says that his father and other leaders, probably all of them, have had corporeal appearings, if I understand it right. Well, that doesn't happen these days. I'm sorry. That is, as far as I'm concerned, make-believe. And of course, it can never be proven one way or the other anyway. And then he speaks about the supremacy of grace. And we reflect back on the service of these great men that have gone before. How much we missed. And so on. And, you know, he said this is just the second time he'd been back to London in a congregational way for just over 2 years. I think he came, if I remember rightly, in the April, or March or April, 2 years previously, when I think that was just after, yes it was just after Gareth Hales, his eldest son, had assaulted me. So this time I think he brings Charles across, who's the guy that brought a apprehended violence order against me and wanted me a criminal, obviously. But it didn't stick because I had some friends that exposed Laurie Wearmouth in what he'd reported to the Haleses. As far as we can understand from working out the fact that Laurie went to the police in New Zealand to tell him what a bad lad I was, and then he must have reported somehow to the Haleses. I don't know, but obviously Bruce Hales likes to control not only the members, but the ex-members as well. Hence, private detectives following me through the streets of Sydney and New Zealand and camping outside the house I was staying at. I just don't get it. I mean, I'm just Lance, for Pete's sake. And then, the sanctified and sent, would that enter into the service? The men the Lord uses. That's what's, Bruce Hales, that's what's distinguished, you might say. A true servant from perhaps others that have presumed to serve. So he's saying that some servants are real and some are false. Presumptuous, And sanctification needs to enter into all our relations together. Incredible stuff. But we're hearing on the Get Alive podcasts about all the hidden corruption that's going on, the sexual abuse. So this is wonderful talk, but the reality tends to be somewhat different. And of course, you can isolate the opposition with all due respect, because they're very easily finished off, aren't they? If they hide away, you don't know what they're thinking. When you find out what they're thinking, well, you can deal with it. Very graciously, of course. Well, the way he's been pulverising me in court and intimidating me with loads and loads of legal threats, I don't call that very gracious. I don't know that anybody had to make confessions and no one got shut up over it. Anything like that, I don't think. And so on and so forth. And then, a page or two on violence and sword fighting, as I said. And then he speaks to Garth about the long walks that I used to organise those. There was a canal walk, which he refers to, which was from Leeds through to Foulridge in Lancashire. And that was the 38 or 36 miles that Kenny Fulcher and Glenn Harding managed. Good on them. But, I used to take a lot of the homeschoolers back in the homeschooling 90s days out for long walks and played games with them because they were just stuck at home, cooped up at home with the mums. And the mums were quite appreciative, actually, because it gave them a break. But, I used to take the initiative on fitness and anything to do with walks, fundraising for the school and all that sort of thing. And then it reminded me, Gareth said, your father told us, you told us your father never did anything to excess. So that was a word for me. That's it. Gareth suddenly gave us the word. Long walks are just excessive, so we must do shorter ones. So as soon as Bruce Hales breathes half a word about his father not doing anything to success, there's a big dampener, Anyway, Bruce Hales says, you were doing it to get money for the school, weren't you? We're always trying to raise money for the school. Money. Schools are like the sisters. They always need money. They spend what we men don't spend because we haven't got anything to spend it on. Yeah. And if you go to Sydney, you see these sisters going around spending lots of money on lavish clothes. And they've never really had to work hard for it. They've been born with silver spoons in their mouth. They're in Hales' own country, all very rich, all very lovely mansions and all that. Not all of them, but if you're in the hierarchy in Hales' good books, you don't have to work really. You can just reap up the benefits of the system. Wow, it's almost heavenly, isn't it? Really? I personally admire people that have come the hard way, had it tough, And then, I think it's just Jim Hazel, who came up to see me with John Rich and told me about this wonderful London room they were building when they were coming up to basically tell me that I was mental and I needed to go on medication. And Jim was really, and John Rich were really trying hard to get me on medication. So he says, it's wonderful that we've had leaders in the recovery that have been skillful in every area of their lives. I think there's a reference to being exceedingly skillful. The resource there's been that's maintained the testimony. And Bruce Hales speaks about skilled in playing, valiant man, man of war, skilled in speech. Yes. So he's linking David, before he took Goliath on, I think, to the great men of the recovery. And wow, all these brethren are taken in by it, the way David took on Goliath. And then Simon Wiley speaks about the Good Samaritan and a neighbour that's near. Well, these guys won't speak to me. I think it was Simon. Simon, when I got through to him on the phone, after I'd been withdrawn from him, slammed the phone down, as did Ben Turner, as did Eric Thorncroft. I rang Eric Thorncroft the couple of weeks ago to tell him I'm coming to Sydney and would like the brethren to marry me. But before I could get it out, as soon as he heard it was Lance Christie on the phone, he slammed the phone straight down on me. Well, where's the grace in that? Why would he chat? His father was badly treated, so I'm in touch with him because I think one day he'll have to come to it that he didn't treat his father well, nor did Bruce Hales. And Bob Thorncroft was a good man. We used to respect him in John Hales' time, but when Bruce came along, he didn't have a chance, did he? And Bob wrote an open letter to all the brethren, quoting Bruce Hales as saying, the Hales' name is mud. And Bruce Hales was determined to turn that round and make the Hales name adored and revered. Well, why was it mud? Because they mucked up. Simple as that. Certainly in 65, a big issue had to be taken over the commercial system. It's all in the records. And to try and change history, rewrite history, is just wrong. It's just not true. It's double. It's deceitful. It's insidious. So another ex-brother who I respect commented, clearly advocating violence. This should be reported to the relevant police authorities for the London Room area. A Muslim cleric using these words would be arrested. He's got a point, hasn't he? Note the advice to young brethren to act without thinking. I think it's Siverite from Rome. Submissive attitude the whole time, ready for any adjustment the Lord may bring in for us. Bruce Hales, yes, very good. See how quick it was with him, we know. We knew what it was when we were younger to act quickly, immediately, without taking counsel with anybody. And then I think, as soon as we got on, we lost that sense of urgency. That's the word for young people today, young brothers, young sisters. If you're in a wrong position, if you're going on with what's wrong, you get convicted, act immediately, do it without a second thought, just act. So don't think, just do it. You do the doing, I'll do the thinking. And that's really, in a nutshell, what Bruce Hales says. Another ex-brother who I respect, Bruce Hales knows that any reference to the great men is immediately applied by the poor sheep to Bruce himself. He's referring rather sarcastic or rather derogatory to the brethren as sheep, because they're just yes sir, 3 bags full, bar kind of thing, It's his way of promoting himself. So this brother is saying that Bruce Hales is promoting himself without appearing to do so. Very clever, isn't it? I am sure from the title of the reading that his real theme is recognising Bruce Hales as a manifestation of the Lord. And I think honest brethren would agree that that is the implication. These great men, you see. So another ex-brother, again who I respect, Lance, his whole delivery is not very coherent and shows worrying signs of alcoholism or early onset of dementia. Well, that's what he was saying about me when I was in fellowship. So, I suppose we could all make these comments, but it's for us to take to heart. If I'm mental, that's my matter. I don't need Bruce Hales and all the hierarchy to tell all the brethren that I'm mental. And then in his long aggressive section, he sinks to his own natural level. Sword fight, wrestling, boxing. Not just a quick illustration, it goes on and on. The one good thing is he says he reads the letters, so he must feel some guilt, but trapped by his years of planning and execution, a sad spectacle. I had to reread several times to see how he got from Christ and his disciples to JT Jr. and his assemblies and to BDH and his. And I could find no link and concluded that to him and to them they have become synonymous. Christ was simply the first of these great men. Very sad and serious. So the inference is that JT Jr. was one who came in his father's name, and that's not God's name, that's a man's name. Now it seems Bruce Hales is claiming the same for himself, and perhaps also for one of his sons. Maybe he's going to claim the Hales name and the leadership as well. It seems we have a new father, a new Christ, and a new devil. Now, then he says, sorry, so that, dear brother, but then Bruce Hales did say, referring to me, when I was in trouble in Leeds, the devil's in Leeds, and I checked it, and he was referring to me. So, if he gives it, he should be able to take it. And if people are taken in with this high-flown language, well, they need to have their eyes open and be able to check it and test whether it is the true word from heaven and it's nourishing for the soul. So I'm now going to read Peter Harrison's letter to Bruce Hales, which Bruce received shortly before he made this trip to England after the COVID crisis had settled, or virtually settled. Dear Mr. Hales, you and I have never met personally. Well, that ties up exactly with what Bruce Hales, someone he'd never met. So I'm pretty sure this was the letter he's referring to. But you are evidently aware of my writings, which are fundamentally prompted by my concerns as to the devastating effects of abuse of power. Can I assume that you also would carry concerns to this yourself? Abuse of power has been a scourge on humanity throughout history. I have strong evidence that members of the PBCC fellowship not only reject my writing, but are very deliberately refusing to speak with me, to come clear about my intentions. Instead, they collectively categorise me as an evil opposer without giving any sound basis for their condemnation. You must agree that being in opposition to something is not in itself a moral issue. The PBCC fellowship is beyond dispute shaped by your intentions, and I suffer painfully by your categorising of me as evil. My son James and his family in Greymouth refuse contact with me and will not meet with me in view of clearing misunderstandings, and he refuses my attempts of reconciliation. This attitude is contrary to his inhibited godly nature. I hold you, Mr. Hales, as directly responsible for maintaining destruction of my household. I am now in my mid-80s and yearn for a sincere relationship with my grandchildren and their offspring. And the Lord's taken him now, and that wasn't granted. It's so serious and so sad. It is your influence which has eased them into putting the blame on me for all that has happened, even though members of your fellowship admitted in 2002 that there was no basis to put me out of the fellowship. They seemed more concerned about damage to their reputations than their destruction of my family life. That's a very significant point he's making there. Yeah, maybe words are strong, as Hales said in the reading. There is some truth in their gut feeling that I just didn't belong, but falling back on that is a cowardly act of avoidance. I have suffered physically through brethren influence, but it is the reckless destruction of my family which causes enduring grief. I continue to be awesomely impressed with the impregnable system you have built, but I must conclude this is all at the evident cost of loss of soul in those who have yielded to your power. They've sold their souls to Bruce Hales, haven't they? They are all obliged to agree with what is expected of them. Jesus Christ brought this evil to a head by allowing himself to be crucified, with people agreeing to put him to death. Comparison of your cruel, controlling system with the biblically presented rule of Jesus Christ is so stark that I am left to regard your system as anti-Christian. And yes, there are benefits. I write mindful of many others who have suffered. It is not my place to tell you what to do, but I would rejoice in favourable change which would be consistent with the good intentions expressed in the Charity Commission document. Please acknowledge receipt of this letter and give me an indication of your intentions. Well, the only acknowledgement of receipt was in that reading in London. He never wrote back to Peter Harrison, never did. Peter wrote to his local brethren, John Hales a number of times, and Bruce Hales. No replies. My son and family in Greymouth need to see a copy of this letter, but he doesn't receive anything sent from me, his father, so I'd be very grateful if you would send a copy to his home at Greymouth, New Zealand. In all sincerity, Peter Harrison. Well, I think that's a very, very affecting letter. And if the brethren can just understand that shortly after he died, without Bruce Hales doing anything to bring in reconciliation or even allow him to speak to his son, who he clearly loved and had been in touch with. And Peter has written, I've got a whole set of writings. He's written some wonderful articles, and I've already suggested to Garth, Christie and Neil and my sons that the Bible and Gospel Trust and Clive Anderson publish his letters, because he takes issue with untruth and damage and hurt and distress that the brethren are causing to those that they've excommunicated. Nicky Hager, who's an investigative journalist in New Zealand, well respected, blew open the brethren interference in the elections, New Zealand elections, I think it was in 2005. It says, in this clearly written book, Peter Harrison tells the story of his father's life in the exclusive Brethren Church. It is a shocking story. His father, Richmond, was a big-hearted, energetic man. Although he ran a large horticultural business, he found time to write a series of books about ornamental plants and had many interests ranging from trout fishing to collecting Maori artefacts. He was an active and generous member of the Exclusive Brethren. The book tells the sad story of how in the 1950s the church morphed into an intolerant authoritarian structure, rife with injustice, which stripped him of his distinctive qualities and gradually ruined his life and his values. The book is much more than a family memoir. Told in a calm and factual way, it shows how the Exclusive Brethren Church, that's PBCC now, has been hijacked and damaged, and has damaged the lives of many of its members. Families have been torn apart, lives stunted, and otherwise decent people have ended up hurting the very people they had a responsibility to protect. It is fundamentally a story about submission to abusive power, and so addresses issues of wider significance. The abuse and harm continue. The Exclusive Brethren currently crave public acceptance, yet are paranoid about critical comment. Strict secrecy and crippling discipline prevail. This makes it very important that former Exclusive Brethren, such as Peter Harrison, are willing to tell their stories. The more the system is written and talked about, the sooner it will have to change. And then it goes on that Lance's aim is to reform the church so that they are at least compliant with the Charity Commission legislation, but also become a caring, compassionate church instead of a ruthless business which destroys individuals and family. Peter's blood is crying from the ground, and I want to keep pressing Clive Anderson and the other trustees of BGT to publish his writings. Peter says that the problem in the brethren is very deep. During priestly visits, he had determined to be strictly honest and to say what he truly felt, rather than saying what he was expected to say. That got him into deeper and deeper trouble, despite his desire being to have a good conscience before God, rather than appearing righteous before men. As a result, his wife asked him for a legal separation. Peter went along with her request because he felt sorry for his children, having to live away from home on his account. He honestly acknowledges that he thought for 3 years that his problem must stem from some basic spiritual defect because of the power of what the priests held against him. And that's what they do. They destroy or attempt to destroy the peace you found through your links in divine persons, and feel that they can adjudicate on your ability to partake in the Christian fellowship, because basically it's a thank God we're not as the rest of men, rapacious, unjust, greedy. So they section off the ex-brethren, certainly any that raise any questions or comments, and have nothing to do with them. They will not allow. And yet, kindness is at the heart of Christianity and is foreign to the PBCC fellowship, insofar as all its kindness is conditional and is withdrawn as soon as you resist submission to their control. Very unkind. A very, very unkind organisation, that where they insist on submission. And Peter's written some super articles, one on duress, for instance, and he goes on to say that it's just, he talks about me. Lance was born into a family committed to the EB fellowship. Lance absorbed and believed in the teachings of the fellowship. At 16 years of age, Lance's parents were wrongly put out of fellowship, and Lance remained loyal, accepting the cost. At 21, Lance began his own business, Weaveable, which quickly became very successful, and so on and so forth. And Lance didn't realise that he had ceded control in his business, and didn't realise that in a short space of time, after he'd signed a partnership agreement, Bruce Hales would use his power, along with his ecclesiastical authority, to make an example of Lance, to destroy him, his family and his livelihood. To what purpose was it? His system of power was under threat by Lance's insubordination to his hierarchy. That was intolerable for Bruce Hales. The only immunity from this fate of losing everything is to resign to acceptance that the man of God is right, regardless of the promptings of one's own conscience. This is in fact the only secure path within the fellowship, and is followed automatically. Bruce Hales builds trust to a critical level and then exploits it strategically. So you lose control of your life through foul play. Your objective, Lance, was to help those who have left, but then also to reform the system from within. Success depends on everyone rallying to your call. I hope it succeeds. The probable outcome is beyond me to imagine. So he ends up this little piece by asking, are you free to follow righteousness? Are you free to depart from iniquity? This is to the brethren. Are you free from obligation to conform to a creed or dogma or rules and regulations? Are you free to respond to your conscience? Are you free to walk a Christian pathway? Very wholesome questions. And rather than keep resisting, I appeal to the brethren to welcome a diverse story. You know, or the letters of the great men, Darby, Raven, Taylor Senior, Junior, Simonton, very few, John Hales and Bruce Hales. We get the letters from them, but we never got the letters from those that were asking questions or opposing. That would give the brethren much more balance if they published my letters, Peter's letters, Hubert Calvi of Southport in JT Junior's time. Loads more. And then they can see, actually, they've got a point. But just to control the narrative and instill fear into people isn't fair. It's not respectful to your congregation, because they're not allowed to exercise their own discretion. They're deceived and prejudiced against anything I say or do because Bruce Hales has judged. And that has to carry right through the 53,500 brethren. So if he says that I'm a bad man, I'm a bad man. If he says I'm a heretic, I'm a heretic. And that came up in the court as the reason they withdraw from me, because I'm a heretic. Well, what does that mean? I suppose he says I'm a heretic because I don't agree with physical separation. Well, no, not when it breaks up families, not when it's used as a tool to cause distress and harm and suffering. Peter wanted his relationship with his inside son. It was not granted. Peter was visited, I understand, 3 times in the last month before the Lord took him. And Caleb Hall, I've said this before, needs to give us all the ex-brethren, an account of why he didn't allow Peter to see his son, James, in Greymouth and his grandsons. I think him being taken at that point is a very loud voice to the brethren. And we must remember that John Hales apologised profusely, a very full letter of confession to Brian Deck, Peter's father-in-law, in 1965 after he'd been excommunicated. So there was something very fine. I remember Brian Deck, something very fine. Peter Harrison, the same spirit of Christ, very careful, the use of words, perfect use of words. And that is the way to resolve matters. It's negotiation. If there's a war going to break out, far better if the leaders will negotiate and talk to each other and see each other's point of view, not the brethren. They ruthlessly excommunicate you and don't give you any opportunity to present your side of the story. It's not right. It's not fair. In this day and age, we should not be victims to authoritarian regimes and dictators that just wield their strength and don't give any opportunity for anyone to protest or raise a question, because they'll be chucked out as well. So this is an appeal, and I will carry on appealing. I've been appealing for over 6 years now since I left, and I was appealing inside before I left, and becoming more and more unpopular with the hierarchy. Well, the hierarchy need to sort themselves out, be honest with themselves, fundamentally honest. That's what we need to be. Separation goes on inside, not outside. We don't do it to others. We don't cast people off. The Lord didn't do that. He ate with tax gatherers and sinners. What a model.